water, earth, fire, air.
The year is 2019. I got Kovaaks on sale, and after spending a few days on Tile Frenzy, Flick Training, and Ascended Tracking, I didn't see any improvement. So, I scoffed at the notion of aim training and quit after a few hours of playtime. Admittedly, I never quite uninstalled it, so it remained omnipresent on my Steam library. I felt being above average was good enough, and thus aim training to be a waste of time. Then I got whooped. New Modern Warfare comes out. I look at Battlefield 5 and I go, this probably won't turn out good. Boom! Drop into my first match and start whooping all sorts of ass. Second match, same shit, different story. Third match, uh-oh. By the time match 6 rolls around, I'm already playing with a sweat bucket beneath my seat, an M4 primary and a 725 with overkill, kill chain, and spotter, peeking windows like I had rooted toggled from City of Heroes. Those 30 odd seconds of being in a chopper gunner were all that mattered. Not the other 10 minutes of the match, and most certainly not my teammates or their concerns. In the span of a few short matches, I was reduced from feeling like a machine of death in the games I usually played to becoming the very camper I always loathed. Enough was enough. I was tired of getting good at a game only to have to seemingly get good over and over again with each new game I played. I could get by on every game I played, even on the harder difficulties with some effort, but I wanted more. After deep spiritual and psychological introspection about what it meant to be good at video games over the holidays, I made a resolution that 2020 was the year I was going to take myself to the next level, starting with my aim. During the hundreds of hours I spent in Kovaaks in the past 6 months, I've discovered 2 key periods of aim training. The expansion period, when you continually break your own high score over and over again, and the compression period, when you shrink the difference between your best and average performances. Expansion is the first period myself and everyone else goes through as we first begin training. Just by becoming more familiar with the dynamics of each scenario, you will break your own high scores over and over again before any real progress is actually made. However, it's actually a lot easier to be engaged during this period than compression because of how observable your progress is from breaking your high scores over time. The first time you experience a period of compression, it will feel like an enormous roadblock that unfortunately a lot of people give up trying to surmount because the effort seems so futile at first. You still haven't noticed any gains, and furthermore, you can no longer reach your prior high score. Best way to get through this initial compression phase and every subsequent one is to either focus on improving your overall daily average and not the high score, or focusing more on how confident you feel with each movement. Alternatively, you can move on entirely from the scenario in question and come back after some time apart. It may seem counterintuitive at first, but the reality is that different scenarios train different aim types, and therefore their periods of expansion and compression may not always coincide with one another. Additionally, recent studies show that altering different types of practice in a dynamic fashion has a much greater net sum than just focusing on one type at a time. And to top it all off, usually upon returning to the scenario and getting back into the groove, you experience an expansion period. With all of this in mind, I suggest always focusing on multiple practice types per session. The training types I'm talking about break down into 4 key categories. Click timing, which is mental kinematics combined with reflex consistency. Tracking, which is sustained effort to keep crosshairs aligned to moving target. Time to track, which is mental kinematics combined with a sustained effort to keep crosshairs aligned to a moving target. And flick, which is a single motion snap and fire onto your target. These are all classed for the purpose of focusing on a particular area of aim. In a real game scenario, each is used separately or all at once, depending on the context at hand. What you should main first depends on both your prior FPS experience and also what you're initially seeking out of this training. If you're usually drawn to sniping gameplay and simply just want to be a better sniper, then you would naturally want to focus on time and flicks to get those sick sniper montages. But if instead you've long steered clear of anything not automatic, getting your feet wet with tracking and time to track is much better. Either way, what I'll be upfront about is that I don't at all recommend focusing solely on your weakest areas first. It can become a tempting mindset to spend practice time just at what you're bad at and to continue to just play your favorite game as you always do for all your other areas. But as experience has taught me, this only hinders you in the long run. Practice how you play exists as an idiom for a reason, and that is because direct in-game observation of how your training scenarios both compare and contrast to the real game ones is crucial for internalizing all the practice you did. When a sniper is in doubt, they must be able to rely on their precise timing to see them through the day. From the most basic play of waiting for your target to walk into your crosshairs, to your brain trying to calculate the velocity of an enemy with 250 ping rubber banded in front of you, to someone who just snorted G Fuel and is now AD spamming. That one shot needs to be on target. Popcorn Goated and Popcorn Sparky are the best tools at the moment for just that. Both scenarios force mental on-the-fly calculations at various speeds and trajectories for you to line up and then successfully execute your shot. Furthermore, unlike classic popcorn, there are no immediate follow-up shots, and thus they better simulate the pressure of sniping. Popcorn in general, however, has a high barrier to entry for being an effective training tool, so I wouldn't start on it first unless you want to experience a period of deep anguish and self-doubt. An easier and still great initial tool for timing practice is one wall 5 target pasu. Unlike popcorn, these targets can move and switch directions at any time rather than moving in a singular predictable trajectory. Instead, they move in a confined space in front of you and don't often double switch from one direction back to the other as typically seen in fast strafe scenarios. The main drawback is at a certain point of proficiency, this scenario becomes more useful in training time to track as you learn to match your mouse speed to be slightly faster than the target and then click when the crosshairs are aligned. However, a big part of this scenario will always be mentally estimating the trajectories of each ball, and so it is always useful for timing practice. Once thought of as an aging skill due to the reduction in TTK as FPS games progressed over the decades, hero shooters, like Overwatch, where characters still have relatively large health pools, have once more revitalized the value of pure tracking skills. Warming up with a round or two of close long strafe before any training session is highly recommended. Close fast strafe scenarios are best for close quarters combat practice as you familiarize yourself with tracking large, sporadically moving objects directly in front of you. The perception that the rapid movement is overwhelming fades with time, and once you become proficient, real game tracking in the same scenarios will feel much breezier. For more conventional tracking, Kata Fast and Long Strafes are both superior choices to the ever-popular Ascended Tracking version 3 because of the more fluid structure and non-focus on hitting your target perfectly center mass. When dealing with a strafing enemy, you actually want your crosshair to drag behind the target while still remaining on target. This is so when they change directions, your shots will still hit the mark, and more importantly, you have a longer time to react to the change in direction. You ultimately want enough time to be able to distinguish between an 80-80 fake out versus an actual shift in direction similar to a long strafe. Air and ground plaza variants should also be incorporated into your routine to prevent yourself from adjusting to the same movement speeds over and over again. Time to track is currently the most useful skill in the modern FPS meta. Being able to observe the kinetics of the target, calculate a timed intercept course, and then continuously track the target in motion is the essence of time to track. This skill is most useful for ARs and DMRs because you now must track multiple shots over time rather than landing a single critical hit. and so there is much less emphasis on first shot accuracy. Scenarios like Pat target switch, Vox target switch, Ken target switch, and the more recently minted Pat target switch version 2 are all very good scenarios for this. They each call on you to track a target for a brief period of time and then quickly switch to track another target. If you are still committed to incorporating Ascended Tracking version 3 into your aim routine, then this is where you would add it. Many of these scenarios also have 360 variants, where you can further hone snapping to different directions based upon sound. The school of the flick has long been deemed heretical and abolished for the corrupting effects it had on its users. To focus your training or to build an entire playstyle on flicking is to be a heretic unwelcome to the path of quantum ascension. I hated people that did nothing but flick around everywhere with max sensitivity when I was a kid playing COD on the Xbox 360, and nothing has changed. This is all to say that flicks are actually very useful, and to deny their value and power, both real and perceived, would nonetheless be unwise. Now that is out of the way, the center of your crosshairs never moves from its exact spot in the middle of your screen. Thus, by keeping either your 360 or view distance, a topic for another video, consistent across all various shooters, not only do you mentally familiarize yourself with the link between your real-time mouse movement and in-game character movement, but the reflex arcs responsible for muscle memory also begin to automate more and more of this process over time. Differences and input delays of any game you want to play count major here. I uniformly use G-Sync and NVIDIA's ultra-low latency mode across all my games, as I find having minimal mouse latency crucial for offsetting my slower mouse sensitivity. Reflex flick and target acquisition flick variants, as well as double pop-up endurance, are all great scenarios for this, so go crazy. As I continue onwards towards 1,000 hours and beyond in the Kovaaks, I'll post another update on my progress and additional things I've uncovered along the way. In a future video, I'll also be going over some of the more mechanical aspects of aiming I've discovered. Thanks for tuning in. This is Void Hunt Geo3, signing out.